Hello, and welcome back to GPS Live for May 31st, 2024. We're back again with some great stories this week, but before we get to that, I am Tristan Morris.
And I'm Jonathan Singer.
And we are here for GPS Live to talk to you guys about news stories that we found for the week that we thought are interesting or provide some insight into cybersecurity. If you're joining us live, thank you so much for giving us some time on a Friday around your lunch break. And if you're watching this on demand, again, thank you for that time. We really appreciate you guys coming in. But what we love the most is when you comment and let us know where you're coming from and what your thoughts on the stories are. And if you have any thoughts on stories we could cover in the future or things we should keep an eye on. But let us know what your opinions are on the things we're talking about, because we love to bring that into the show and integrate it with us. Jonathan, how are you doing this week?
You know, I'm doing really well. It's kicking up over here in Florida. Schools are out. So summer is here. School's out for summer. And just having fun, enjoying, getting a little bit of outdoor time. For those that do like the outdoors, it is feeling really good, having fun, and keep an eye on the news because there is a lot of things happening. How about you, Tristan?
A lot of things happening. Well, I'm on like week 3 of battling whatever this head congestion thing that I have is. So if I still sound weird, that's why. But other than that, yeah, spring and summer are coming, which means that I can come straight out of this head cold that I've got and right into allergies. So, things are going to go wonderfully. But outside of that, can't complain. We've got some awesome stuff going on. We did have some good stories that we found this week. So before we dive into those, what we have to say is that the views and opinions that Jonathan and I express are our own and do not necessarily reflect the views of GuidePoint Security. It's not an official statement on GuidePoint Security's behalf, despite all of the logos that are present. We are just two guys talking about cybersecurity and the stuff that we find interesting. So with that, Jonathan, you want to kick us off with our first story here?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we recently talked about this on the show, in fact, that BreachForums was taken down, individuals arrested, and even conversations being pilfered by the feds as we speak. But more recently, we've also noticed that BreachForums has been revived. And specifically, one of the hot topics for sale right now is that of 560 Ticketmaster customer records. Now, keep in mind that Ticketmaster is owned by Live Nation, and we do not by any means want to, speak to any brand particularly by endorsing or negatively about them. It's just part of the story, and we want to make sure that that's understood. But this BreachForums, now that it's been revived by another group of individuals, is looking to sell their wares. Specifically, we're talking a number of bits of information across customer details and even transactional things. So it's not looking too good.
1.3 terabytes of data is a lot of data. So it's 560 million Ticketmaster customers are allegedly impacted by this database leak. And like you mentioned, yeah, a lot of individual pieces of information included in there, like home and email addresses, phone numbers, ticket sales orders, event information, credit card numbers, authentication types, expiration, basically everything that you need to start using a credit card on your own. But I think the crazy thing about this is this data spans transactions from 2012 to 2024. So 12 years of transaction data. Basically, if you've been to a concert anytime in the last decade.
I was going to say, I'm definitely one of those. I know probably you are too.
Oh, yeah.
So is producer Ben. Now, one thing we do want to make sure that it is known that it is a hashed credit card number, but it is a plain text, last 4 digits, authentication type, expiration date, and other financial transaction related information. So not that really adds a whole lot of security these days with our hash cracking capabilities and GPU rigs.
Especially since here's the great thing about it, right? Is you want to talk about hash cracking and stuff like rainbow tables or anything like that, right? It's the bits of entropy that matter. But when you're looking at trying to crack a password that you don't know the length or character type of, that can be a lot. But when you know that it's 16 numbers and it's always going to be 16 numbers, right? You considerably up your odds of being able to get back to that, because you can eliminate so many results right out the gate.
Now, the particular seller has been interviewed by a number of different parties, which is very interesting and very brazen, in fact, to want to talk about this on a public matter. But they are say that they are entertaining different offers. Right now, the current ask is 500,000 US dollars. And furthermore, it sounds like, according to the seller, that they suspect one of the buyers is even Ticketmaster itself, which would kind of oftentimes make sense in these kind of scenarios, right? Wanting to go ahead and validate the data themselves or be the only one to remove it from public sale so that it can't be purchased by anybody else is definitely a tactic. It is similar to what we see in the ransomware world, where by paying a little bit extra in one of the different models of ransomware, you basically wipe it from the ransomware group. Now, again, this is also a trust model, and we know there is no trust among thieves.
Yeah, no trust among thieves. Now, it's another thing that's important about this story, right? As far as like, hey, is the potential buyers are out there. Ticketmaster might be one of them, or is kind of suspected to be one of them by these actors. Important to note, Ticketmaster has not responded to comments or requests for comments on this, and the FBI has also declined to comment on whether they are working with Ticketmaster to investigate these incidents or these breaches, but specifically, right, as the cybersecurity collective, VX Underground, claims that they have spoken to threat actors that allegedly breached Ticketmaster, and said that they could steal company data from their AWS instances. So they claim to have spoken with the people who may have conducted this breach. But like I said earlier, the FBI is declining to comment on whether they're working with Ticketmaster on these claims that Shiny Hunter is making.
Yeah. Now, one of the things here that comes to mind for me is the fact that there's 12 years of transactional record history here. And
that's a lot of PCI audits. I want to.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely correct. And that's what kind of comes to mind for me is that part of a lot of these audits, written in stuff like PCI, for instance, is to not store data that is no longer necessary. Now, what is considered no longer necessary may be a business justification, but it is something to consider, especially for our viewers out there. What type of data is your business holding on to? And is it truly necessary for your day-to-day operations or for future audits? There may be a stale data cutoff date, and that's basically just deciding from this point on, we actually no longer need data. Maybe that be 5 years, 7 years, or 10 years. And to remove that data, to reduce the number of individual records that could be put at risk in some kind of a breach. This is what we've been dealing with from a PCI perspective for a very long time.
From a personal security perspective also, though, right, this throws into light the fact that, or kind of like re-highlights the fact that it may be convenient to allow sites like Ticketmaster or other places that you use to store your credit card data and keep it instead of re-entering it every time, right? But especially when you're looking at something like extremely popular events that might sell out fast or something like that, you want to get through it quickly. But by doing that, you're putting a perpetual license to store that data right into that system for as long as you leave it there. But also something that's not covered in this story and that we don't know, right, is across that 12 years, was this one breach that happened in 2024, right? Did this happen at the beginning of this year and it collected all of this information, or has this been a long ongoing it's like slow trickle kind of thing that's been happening over time? Because you also have to keep that in mind, right? Is the fact that even if you stick to all of the standards and documentation and rules around how long you store these things, if you have an ongoing undetected breach on your hands, right, that is just slowly pilfering this over time, the questions about liability get murky, right? On these kinds of things, and this is not the first time that this kind of thing has occurred with major providers like this, right? These kind of long spanning dumps of data, but it certainly will not be the last. So it's important things to keep in mind, and especially like I mentioned from a personal standpoint, not storing your credit card data and stuff. That goes for your business credit cards too, right? You put your business card into a system and store it, and you might be opening yourself up to a world of hurt there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying, Apple Pay does have one thing right, which is the generation of a card for each transaction that kind of prevents any kind of additional misuse of that credit card number outside of the original source of that purchase, right? And so, checking out with that stuff on like mobile apps these days does help increase security. But as more information becomes available, we'll be monitoring the news. I imagine it is going to make national news as it's slowly making itself around the internet over the next 24 hours. So be on the lookout for emails from your past ticket purchases to your favorite concerts.
Yeah. And that actually, your mention of Apple Pay there, right? With all of the digital payment systems, it is something that I have been looking forward to. It started slowly over the course of the early pandemic, right? But it's still been ramping up and coming out. Is the fact that like tap to pay with cards, chip and pin, right? The fact that essentially your card is no longer the numbers that's on it; it's instead it's the hash token inside it, right? Is much better, and really glad to see us moving in that direction, and hopefully we get to a point someday where that's the default, right? All systems just operate off of that. But moving forward to talk about some more massive hundreds of thousands of impacted folks. Our next story comes to us from a couple different sources. We had one from, I believe, Ars Technica. We had one from The Verge. But primarily where I'm getting a lot of information is directly from the report from the company Lumen, the report from Black Lotus Labs, their threat research wing, called the Pumpkin Eclipse. 600,000 routers were bricked last year by a new mystery malware that kind of cropped up on the scene. This is a huge incident. So kind of, someone giving you a call there, Jonathan?
It is now on mute. Lesson learned.
No, it's fine. No, it's fine. Take it. No, but 600,000 routers were bricked in a single cyber attack last year. So last year, there was a surge of people reporting that their routers were down. Specifically, two models of router seemed to crop up over and over again. And that was the two models, the Action Tech T3200 and the T3260, seem to be cropping up in these reports. And what Black Lotus Labs discovered as they were going back through some information, and they were able to find that these 600,000 plus small and home office routers were being taken offline. They all belonged to a single autonomous system number, which is the number assigned to internet providers that all those routers talk to. They were all assigned to that, and they were all infected with a single family of malware called Chalubo, a commodity remote access Trojan that was the primary payload for the event.
Yeah. Now, the Pumpkin kind of comes into play because it was October of last year, but over a 72-hour period, all of these pieces of hardware were essentially rendered useless. They wouldn't even respond to a reset call. This particular malware, although it hasn't been fully explained how it landed on all of these devices, basically opens up a backdoor, right? It is a remote access Trojan, as you mentioned. And so once a backdoor is established, you can run commands on these devices. And so further in the research, this off-the-shelf backdoor that was plopped onto the system basically gave the attacker full access. And it seems through the research that the attacker simply rendered the devices unusable by, if I read correctly, potentially overwriting the firmware and therefore causing the device to no longer function or even reboot.
Yeah, which it's really interesting. Like I'm wondering if that was a mistake, right? To fully brick the router, or if it was the intentional thing. But Chalubo specifically, this malware, it's designed. It has payloads and kernels designed specifically for small and home office and IoT devices. But it's got pre-built functionality for denial of service attacks, and it can execute Lua scripts, anything that is sent to the bot. So it seems like this may have been a large scale botnet potentially, that was being built. But there's some interesting things that happen with this malware in particular, which is primarily that, excuse me, it can remove its own installer and remove its own processes that were put in place in order to establish its connections, and then it assumes the name of a running process on the device already, so that it can evade detection. But it also overwrites restrictions on memory on the device, so that it doesn't its process doesn't get killed by running into an out of memory error. So this thing has some really hefty persistence built in to ensure that it continues running. But like you said, this overwrote the firmware on these routers and devices, completely breaking them and making them inoperable. A lot of the reports that were coming in from customers who were experiencing this were saying that they were just left staring at a blinking red light on their router. But one thing that you mentioned earlier that's really important to this is a very early in the investigation process, because there still is not an identified initial access vector. And part of the thing I'm thinking that might be tripping that up is that this required a full hardware recall on the behalf of this internet service provider. So they had to recall all of these routers and replace them. And so at this point, it might be very hard to actually investigate those old routers and see how exactly they were accessed.
Yeah, because in this case, it's essentially a denial of service for the entire network, or at least this ASN that you mentioned. And furthermore, the customers of this particular network are often in underserved and rural communities. So this directly affected a very sizable portion of people that, really kind of relied on this as their only form of online communication. It creates an interesting challenge where if your internet goes out because a device that you were given suddenly has malware on it, and you don't have a backup plan, you don't have a store you can just go and drop this off at,
Right.
and you can't just unplug it and plug it back in again, as they may say, with a blinky light.
Yep.
It kind of really put a hamper on operations across the board. And again, we're talking about 600,000 devices being taken offline as part of this. Again, as the research continues to discover, how this got here and why this is even here in the first place, or if mistakes were made as to why it got bricked, we'll find out. We covered in our previous story about how taking advantage of devices can be used for nefarious reasons, right, and operate some kind of thing. Or actually, just kidding. That's going to be our next story. I didn't want to mess that one up.
Before we accidentally trip ourselves up into the next one, some things that I do want to point out that that Black Lotus pulled out from this, right? They talk about the fact that the infection mechanism was done remarkably well, right? That this malware was kind of beautifully rendered, and they only had a single report from 2018 to go off of for this, right? This malware had only been reported on one other time in 2018. And so you go from 2018 all the way to 2023 before you see this thing pop up again. And some of the things that they call out for this malware, right? Deleting the loader and the Chulubo agent from the file system once they're executed, renaming the process to be something that's already running on there, Cha-Cha encrypted communications to retrieve main payloads, and then embedding a second set of encryption keys, and nonce to decrypt any of the Lua scripts that come in, 30-minute delays in between initial beacons to evade sandbox detection, ability to execute arbitrary Lua scripts on the host machine, is the way that they primarily would assume that command and control was executed. But they did notice a couple flaws in this. So the only mistake that they observed was that it was using the exact same encryption key and nonce that was documented in 2018, which would seem to indicate that this is, if not the same exact threat actor as it was in 2018, and it's not just it's not just a piece of malware that's going from actor to actor, but also just the fact that this is that potentially a single threat actor from all the way from 2018, but that they've evaded detection so well, right, that they had no need to change these things out. and then they also saw, like as an oddity, a bunch of commands related to DDoS functionality being sent to bot devices within this bot network, but they did not use the embedded DDoS functionality inside the Chalubo binaries. So some interesting things happening with this one.
Correct. But with that in mind, it actually does kind of open us up to a nice little segue here to our next story to be featured,
Yes.
which is coming to us from the Hacker News, talking about dismantling the world's largest 911 S5 botnet. And to put things in scale with that perspective, there's 19 million infected devices. Now, like this previous story, basically malware has been put on a number of systems and kind of really just taken advantage. And the fraudster behind this made this botnet available for sale for people to do all kinds of nefarious things. Just to name a few, like carrying out cyber attacks, financial fraud, identity theft, child exploitation, harassment, bomb threats, and even export violations.
Yeah. Now this is such a massive takedown that it actually got its own PR from the Department of Justice, and the fact that I'm sorry,
Merrick Garland, Attorney General.
Garland. Yeah, I was Attorney General Merrick Garland made an entire statement about it. I could not remember his name to save my life for a second there. But spanning over 190 countries, the botnet was a proxy service. And it was called 911 S5. It's right. That's not a style of botnet. That was the name of this one. But specifically, they called out it's likely the world's largest botnet ever. And a 35-year-old Chinese national, Yan Huang, has been arrested in Singapore. Was arrested on May 24th for creating and acting as the primary overseer and administrator of this entire thing. And interestingly, arrested on May 24th, so just a couple days ago, but he was identified as the proprietor of this entire botnet by cybersecurity's own Brian Krebs in July of 2022. All right, so 2 years on after being identified, we have the Department of Justice has taken down this botnet and arrested the individual responsible for administrating it.
Yeah. Now, this was turned into a business. And for that, basically, people would pay to access this massive botnet network or for all kinds of things like VPNs, but also to pull off a lot of malicious attacks. More specifically, imagine if you could access an IP address in another country very quickly to target somebody within that thing. For instance, credit card fraud is often easily pulled off when the connection is from within the same country where the credit card originates and the storefront exists. You're breaking a little bit of international boundaries there. Yeah, to help defeat some of the fraud mechanisms that are built in. But other things that go along with it is that this particular threat actor racked up about $100 million in sales and then started to funnel that money into a number of things like cars, watches, and even over 20 different houses and investment properties across the world. So
I always think it's so funny to me, right? When you see it with a lot of cyber criminal activity and kind of these people who manage to get rich very quickly off of these schemes that they enact through cybercrime and through hacking. It's always so funny to be how unimaginative they are with their hundreds of millions, like just to buy a bunch of houses and cars,
Lambo, mansion,
Yeah. 20 buy your 27th house in a different country. Do something interesting with the money, right? Build a submarine. I don't know. Do something fun. You have so much money at your disposal.
Get yourself a Patek Philippe watch while you're at it. Come on.
Yeah, but this is this botnet, right? It was taken down by the Department of Justice after Brian Krebs reported on it in July of 2022. They shut down for a little bit, citing a data breach, quote unquote. But then it was resurrected under a new name called Cloud Router. And I think that the one of the things to pay attention to here in this story, right, is the fact that this was, as we've said a couple times, a residential proxy service, and I see ads constantly, right? And the types of videos that I watch on YouTube, a lot of them are sponsored by legitimate VPN companies that are offering VPN services. But you will see a lot of ads across the internet for free VPN services, and a lot of those could be pointing back to something like this. And in fact, this the article explicitly calls out that Wang allegedly propagated the malware for this botnet through free VPN programs like Mask VPN and Do VPN. So when you are talking about educating employees about cybersecurity, right? We talk about these kinds of things all the time, like these weird kind of edge use cases that we don't necessarily, we always think about like talking about phishing. We always think about talking about, the various forms of social manipulation that might happen to try and gain access and all of these things. But the broader spectrum of cybersecurity education that needs to take place around things like, hey, if you need a piece of software, right, here's how you make sure that you're downloading from a legitimate source, right? If you need, if you want to use a VPN, here's how to make sure you're using a good VPN. I mean, I remember back in the mid 2000s kind of era, right? The idea of like free antivirus software, right? And there was the lists of like the best free AVs that were out there, and like half of them wound up being viruses themselves, right? So when you think about the average consumer and the average person and the way that they're going about their day to day, right? If they're like, oh, I want to use a VPN for whatever purpose, and they search for free or low cost VPN, you should be educating them about like, these are the things you need to look out for. Because if they, heaven forbid, do that on a work computer, on a work laptop, you're opening yourself up to this kind of problem. Absolutely.
And with the last couple of minutes, we want to definitely talk about the human factor here. We do have some rapid fire stories for the end of our segment. The first person speaking to something that kind of hits close to home for you, which is an op-ed on why the Seattle Public Library would even be targeted, right? And I kind of can understand the perspective of, well, this is a component of government, and oftentimes governments actually do pay ransom. So why not find other pieces of the government? But it's just not that simple, right? When you affect public services, it really takes a hamper, or it puts a hamper on a lot of individuals that rely on these things, right? And this also helps us pivot into the second part of our kind of last minute story, which I'll let you kind of run with here, Tristan.
Yeah, so so there was a recent ransomware attack against Ascension Health, I believe is the name of the company, which is a St. Louis-based healthcare group. But they manage a lot of hospitals, a large number of medical facilities, and they've been hit with a very large-scale ransomware attack. But specifically, this article from CNN, it actually interviews some nurses that are working within the hospitals, and they are trying to draw attention to the fact that this is putting patients' lives in danger because they had to make a sudden switch to paper documentation, causes chaos. They don't have access to lab results that may be vital to saving lives, and they are no longer able to fill prescriptions utilizing all of the safety checks that would be in place by routing those through local pharmacies and having double checks on that. Instead, they have to manually override systems in order to get prescriptions out that doctors are writing by hand. So it's introducing all kinds of chaos into that, and that is the key thing to be thinking about here, right? With these kinds of ransomware attacks, like trying to orchestrate and introduce chaos into the system in order to pressure that kind of the payment of the ransom as quickly as possible. These double, triple extortion techniques. As we become more aware of these things in cybersecurity, as we get better at detecting and defending against these kinds of things, we're just going to see an increase in these high pressure scenarios that are coming about.
Yeah, just to put in perspective, almost 250 healthcare, we'll say within the healthcare sector, businesses reported to the FBI last year that they had a ransomware case, right? And imagine all the ones that are unreported But even furthermore, there's active research going on with how lethal ransomware can be within the healthcare sector, citing statistics which do show an increase in mortality rates when a hospital or healthcare business is affected by ransomware. But I didn't want to kind of end on a high note rather than something else sad. The pandas are coming back to the Smithsonian Zoo. I know I'm really big on this one because panda diplomacy between the United States and China is critical for our continued success of not, destroying everything.
If only we could start working on getting some of that Chinese electric vehicle diplomacy going, because I would love to buy one of those 10,000.
Not gonna happen. Even if they're manufactured in Mexico, we're not getting.
Yeah, no, but yeah, the panda diplomacy is an important part. It is a very symbolic kind of gesture and link in diplomacy between China and other countries, and so the fact that we are receiving pandas again is a good signal. But with that little bit of wonderful news, that brings us to the end of GPS Live for the week of May 31st. Thank you so much for joining us and for watching. Edward Moore, Juan Suarez, a couple other people that we've seen commenting and giving us some feedback in here. Thank you so much for your time. And if you're watching this on demand, like we said at the beginning, thank you again for taking the time to watch. Until next week, I have been and will continue to be Tristan Morris.
And I am Jonathan Singer.
And we will catch you all next time.